I suppose most people now know what ecology is, but just in case there are some people in the audience who don't, I should explain that ecology is that branch of science which deals with the relationship between organisms and their environments. The word is, of course, Greek. Ekos, meaning the house or the household. Loios, meaning the rationale of it, as in economics, which is a similar word. Ecology arose in Western science for this simple reason, that when you try to describe completely the behavior of any living organism, you find that you cannot describe the organism without at the same time describing its environment. And that led to a very interesting thought, that the idea of a separate organism is false. And that, however, is an idea implanted in everyone's common sense. One thinks of oneself as a separate being, and not merely as a separate body, but it gets worse than that. As a separate ego inside a body. And so, in common speech, we are apt to say, I have a body, rather than I am a body. In fact, we look upon our bodies rather contemptuously, because we know they're going to fall apart. The body, the material, the physical aspect is always in some way considered inferior to the mental, the spiritual, the psychological aspect. And so we are brought up to feel, divided into two parts. The mind on the one hand, or the soul, and on the other hand, the body, the corpus, the corpse. And our whole ecological crisis results from this kind of schizophrenic attitude towards our identity. Now, what is the ecological crisis? It is this. We'll just add it up by title. The human world is dangerously overpopulated. And this overpopulation is the result, to some considerable degree, of our progress in medical sciences. We are not so easily wiped out by plagues. At the same time, our overpopulated and technological society is eating up the earth at a fantastic pace, so that people who study, scientists who study food problems, predict that by the year 1975 there will be a worldwide famine unless we can increase the production of food by 25%. It will be possible, but quite difficult, to increase the food production by 2%. We are at the same time fouling our own nest. We are polluting the atmosphere and we are polluting the water. And water, incidentally, is the element necessary for life that is most necessary and in lowest supply. We are tearing the forests off our hills for building purposes, and even more so for making paper upon which to print information, so that every literate person today is practically suffocated in mountains of paper. And think also of your supermarket, the paper bags in which you carry out your groceries instead of following the old-fashioned custom of taking a market basket to the store. Paper wrapping everywhere, all of it destroyed trees. And it isn't as simple as that. For every pound of paper, and compare a pound of plastic, It seems that plastic might be the solution. But whereas the pound of paper will require, say, 5 gallons of water to manufacture it, the pound of plastic will require 30. And that water is all discarded. Let's go on. For military reasons, we have created nuclear energy, and there are also nuclear wastes. And these wastes have to be disposed of, not to mention the existence of nuclear warheads, which of course could destroy all life on this planet at any time. But what to do with the wastes? They are being put in enormous underground and sometimes underwater concrete vats. And these vats will wear out before the substances they contain cease to be radioactive. The problem with the nuclear weapons is not how to avoid their use in war, but how to get them off the planet. Then we will go on to consider the various chemicals that have been prepared for biological and chemical warfare. And again, the problem is how to get rid of them, not how to avoid using them. Now, any one of these problems that I've mentioned, taken alone, would be a serious threat to human survival. But taken all together, where are we? We're insane. And this problem of man in relation to his environment overshadows every other political problem. It isn't just that, as you might say, a president of the United States suddenly gets alarmed about man's relationship to his environment and uses it as a political gimmick to divert attention from racial relations. It isn't like that. It's like when Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle. Just by then flew a monstrous crow, as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both those heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. That's what's happening. In other words, all the traditional political problems, as to whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a right-winger or a left-winger, a capitalist or a communist, a pale pink person or a dark brown person, are absolutely obsolete, because it is highly possible that the human race will not survive beyond the year 2000. So wake up if survival is important. Maybe it isn't. Maybe all stars were originally planets, whereon there developed intelligent life which discovered the nucleus and its secrets and just blew itself up. Maybe that's how things go. It's like saying a chicken is one egg's way of becoming other eggs. But if you are interested in survival, and not mere survival, but in elegant survival, it's necessary to be very wide awake to the ecological problem. There is a historian of science by the name of Lynn White, who's a professor of history at UCLA. And he said recently, the roots of our ecological crisis are religious. And therefore the solution must also be religious, even if not called by that name. And I would like to go first into the reasons why the roots of this crisis are religious. Technology as we know it has emerged out of a certain philosophy of life. And the foundation of that philosophy is a distinction between symbols on the one hand and reality on the other. You might say words and events, map and territory, money and wealth. Now, isn't it obvious that a word is not what it represents? Now, isn't it obvious that a word is not what it represents? A word is a sound, a noise in the air. And if we take the sound water, the sound water cannot be used for washing or drinking. It stands for it. And in just the same way, it is not nutritive to eat dollar bills or checks or credit cards. They are not wealth. They represent it. In the same way, you as a living organism are not the same as your idea of yourself. That is to say, your organism is not your personality, is not your ego. That is simply a concept of yourself in the same way as a dollar is a concept or measure of wealth, or in the same way as a menu represents what is going to be served for dinner. But it is not the dinner. It is very useful and very marvelous to be able to represent the real world with symbols, provided you know what you're doing, provided you do not confuse the two and go for symbols instead of wealth, instead of reality. Now you may ask me, on the other hand, because I'm talking, because I'm a speaker, because I'm a philosopher, what do you mean by reality? And I'm not going to tell you, because it can't be said. Reality is, some people would say, well, that was a clap. But clap is not the same sound as some people will say reality is material and physical. Other people will say reality is mental or spiritual. But you will see that in either case, reality is being defined in terms of philosophical concepts. The notion that the world is material is simply a philosophical school of thought. It's an idea. Equally so is the notion that the world is spiritual. Even if we take it down to God, to the root and ground of being, all we can talk about it is ideas. And those are strings of words, or they may be strings of numbers, or strings of algebraic equations. But they never get there, because words and numbers are always strung out in a line, and you have to scan them with a process of attention called consciousness. And however fast you speed that up, even using computers, the world is always beyond it. Why? Because the world itself is not linear. The world is a multidimensional complex of everything happening all together everywhere at once. Look at it this simply. How do you know how to breathe? You think how to breathe? Did you teach yourself how to breathe? Did you have to go to school to learn how to breathe out of a textbook? No. You breathed as soon as the doctor who delivered you spanked you on the bottom. Nobody had to teach you. But breathing, from the point of view of physiology, is a very complex process. How did you learn? How did you learn how to grow your hair? How to color your eyes? How to shape your bones? How to make your glands give out their proper secretions? You never did learn. In the sense where we mean learning is reading instructions. You may therefore very well disclaim all this skill and say, well, I didn't do it. All this breathing, all this hair, all these eyes, bones, and everything else were given to me by God. To whom then were they given? Is your heart not you? Is it just something you have? Is your brain, which we know less about than any other organ in the body, is that not you? Is it just something you have? If so, I ask again, who is you? Do you know how to open and close your hands? Well, you say, surely I do, because I do it. Yes, but how? You can't describe it in terms of words, although a physiologist may describe it in terms of words, but that doesn't help him to open and close his hands any better than you. So you see, you are a great deal more than you suppose. Because we have all been brought up to confuse our living reality with an idea, with a personality, which is given a name. And as a result of that, we all feel isolated. We all feel as if we were a little man inside our heads, about halfway between the ears and a little way behind the eyes. That's what most people seem to mean when they use the word I myself. So we are detached from our bodies, we have them, and in turn our bodies are detached conceptually, not really, but conceptually, from the rest of the world. And we think, well, everything outside my skin is definitely not me. Now look into some other historical aspects of this strange situation in which we find ourselves. Through the Jewish and Christian religions, we inherit a tradition of thought about the nature of the world, which uses certain metaphors. I should say, first of all, that these metaphors are not essential to these religions, but these religions include them as part of their pedagogy, their way of teaching. So I don't want to, as it were, give offense to anyone here who is a Jew or a Christian. as if I were trying to tear your religion apart. But it is so that both the Jewish and the Christian religions have used an image of the creation of the universe which represents the universe as an artifact, as something made in the same way as a potter would make a vessel, a sculptor, a figurine, or a carpenter, a table. And we get that, of course, right from the book of Genesis. Where it is said that God created Adam out of clay and then breathed the breath of life into his nostrils. So it is fundamental to the common sense of all Western peoples to think of themselves as made. If you are made, you are essentially a mechanism. Now look what happened. Towards the end of the 18th century, advanced Western thinkers found it impossible to believe in God as a super boss, king and lawgiver governing the universe. The reason they found this impossible, they never could prove that such a God did not exist. But that sort of an idea, the old gentleman with the white whiskers on the golden throne of heaven, simply became implausible in relation to the vision of the universe that late 18th century astronomy and other sciences were unfolding. No one would dream of attributing a composition by Beethoven to Palestrina. The style. So when we saw this new vision of the style of the universe, what sort of a thing it is, it was awfully difficult to attribute the nebula in Andromeda to the Lord God Jehovah. Because the Lord God Jehovah just didn't seem to have the imagination to produce that sort of a phenomenon. And you know, when people were thinking then, Christians in Europe and America were thinking then of the world as having been created in 4000 BC. And then they started to think about light years. And the Hindus came along and said, well, of course, we've known this all along. We always calculated the history of the universe in terms of kalpas as our mere basic unit of reckoning. And a kalpa is 4,320,000 years. That's what we begin with. And we think of those added up into crores of kalpas, kotis of kalpas, centuries, you see, of kalpas. We've always thought that way. Well, this upstaged the Christians pretty badly. And so they rushed to reinterpret everything. And they've always been having to do this. And saying, well, of course, when it says in the book of Genesis that God created the world in 6 days, of course, a day, well, it says in the Psalms, 1,000 years are but a day in thy sight. That stretches the day at least to 1,000 years. But then they thought, well, perhaps a day is merely a metaphorical expression. Well, what if God is just a metaphorical expression? See where we get to. But the problem was essentially this, that if you think of the world as an artifact, as something made, and then you find you can no longer believe in the maker, what are you left with? You're left with a machine. And you don't like it. The scientific naturalism of the 19th century, which rejected all supernaturalism, came therefore to regard the world as nothing but a fortuitous congress of atoms. operating in accordance with the principles of Newtonian mechanics.
Software to help you manage
And you would have thought
a
that
live
someone who
stream.
declared himself to be a naturalist
In
would
this
have been
video,
sort of in
we will
favor
set
of
up a
nature.
main gaming scene
But on the
and
contrary,
go over basic
the
settings for a
naturalists
Twitch stream.
began the
For
most
more
savage
in-depth
war
details
against
on
nature
OBS,
ever waged.
see our video How to Use OBS.
Because they
Link is
hated
in the
it.
description below. Let's
Just like
open
Americans,
OBS. Click the plus sign to create a new scene. Then
absolutely
label
loathe
it.
material.
We will call it Gaming Scene. Now, we need
They
to
do
add
everything
sources
to
to
destroy
this
it,
scene.
to convert it
Inside
into
the
poison
source
gas
box,
and garbage.
click the plus sign. Then,
They don't know how
display
to cook,
capture.
how to
Make
dress,
sure Create New is selected. Label it,
and mistreat the
hit
world
OK.
in the most terrible way.
If you're using dual monitors, make sure to choose the one you're actually gaming
Cities
on.
that look
Then,
like rubbish
hit OK.
scattered all
Now,
over
you need to
the
connect
most
your mic.
beautiful mountain
In
country
Sources,
and
click the
plains.
plus button. Click Audio Input Capture.
Cities that look like
Make
rubbish
sure Create New is selected.
scattered all over
Then,
the
OK.
most beautiful
Now select your
mountain
device
country and plains.
and click OK. In your audio mixer window, you can see a
What a
mic level
gorgeous country.
and desktop audio
Speaking
level.
of the territory,
Under each one is a
How
slider.
hideous,
You can
speaking
use
of
it
the
to
map.
adjust the volume. Now let's add a webcam. In Sources, click the plus button. Then Video
because
Capture
material
Device.
is not reverence.
Select your
is not
webcam
respected.
source and hit OK. You can adjust the
Everything is
size
being
and
turned
placement
into
of the webcam right on the screen. Now that your basic gaming
Poison
scene
gas,
is set up, let's connect
smog.
OBS to Twitch to start streaming.
Fate,
Click Settings.
surface sort of
Then go
life.
to Stream.
See?
Here you will enter your stream key from Twitch. Remember, do
Now
not
this is
share your
because
stream key with anyone. To obtain your
When
stream
you
key,
look at the
go to
world as
twitch.tv.
a piece of
Then
machinery,
click on your profile in the top right. Then go to
you
your
know
creator
perfectly
dashboard.
well that all machinery
On
is
the left,
stupid.
click Settings, then Stream.
If we are nothing but
Now copy your stream key
a product of blind
and
energy.
paste it
In other
into
words,
OBS
if
and hit OK.
human reason
Let's look at a couple settings you can
intelligence,
adjust to
love
optimize your stream inside
is
OBS.
nothing but fluke.
Inside your settings, go to
It
Output.
is a result
Then make
of
sure
a
your video
gyration of
bitrate
energy
is set to
as if
6,000
a million
kilobytes per
monkeys
second,
had been typing
and your
for a million
encoder
years
is set
on a
to
million
hardware,
typewriters.
if available.
The chances
Also
are
turn
that
off any
maybe
advanced
at
encoder
some
settings.
point of time
I
they would
suggest
type
doing
out
a
the
speed
Encyclopedia
test on your
Britannica.
internet connection to make sure you have enough upload bandwidth.
And so we have
Google
been
search
brought up
speed test,
to feel
then run the
that
speed
is the
test
sort of
right on the page.
result we are.
You should have at
We
least
are the
7,000
Encyclopedia
kilobytes per
Britannica
second
typed
of
out by the
upload
monkeys.
available to manage a 6,000 kilobytes per second
Now
upload
that's what
stream.
you really believe.
You can now click Start Stream on the bottom right inside OBS,
There
and
are
you will
religious
automatically
people
go
here.
live on Twitch.
And I'm talking of religious people in the sense of those who are faithful attendants of the standard brand religions. You know, Episcopalian, Roman Catholic, Southern Baptist, Reformed, Jewish, whatever. You don't believe in your religions. You think you ought to believe in them. And you feel guilty because you don't. But you don't. If you did, you'd be screaming in the streets. So the clergymen get up every Sunday and they say, dear people, you really ought to have faith. We all ought to have faith. We don't have strong enough faith. If we really had faith, we'd be able to move mountains. You don't hear that kind of sermon when people have faith. So the thing has become implausible in those terms. And therefore we are left with a mechanism, because we inherit the idea of the mechanism through the notion that the world has been made as something is put together from separate parts and constructed. So we look upon everything that exists as an object. Say, well, you know, it's like you put this podium together, for example. You do this, and you do this, and slap it all together, and there, let's stand aside from it and measure it properly in all directions, and we can take an objective view. Of course, we're civilized. We don't regard the podium as a living being. You know, who would dream of addressing the podium and saying, how do you do? I trust that this evening your spirit will be congenial with mine and that we won't get in each other's way. So that's mere animistic superstition. So it's an object, and we can stand aside from it and examine it and measure it and look at it, and we take that attitude in our sciences to everything until we get to quantum mechanics. And that's another story. But the ordinary common sense attitude of people is that the world consists of objects. And furthermore, when you turn that back on you, take an objective attitude to yourself, as in behavioristic psychology. And then you start talking about unconscious mental mechanisms. You get Freud's psychohydraulics, and everything becomes mechanism. Now, obviously, everything that is an object is objectionable. And therefore, when we see the world as not life, as not having subjectivity, but merely being objectivity, we are going to destroy it. We're going to commit suicide on a grand scale, because we don't want to be nothing but machines, something completely explainable. Why not? And this again goes back to the great deep roots of religion. You see, the objective of technology is to control everything. To know the future so completely that it can be predicted, you see, and so controlled. We have the ambition to be God. And in the Genesis myth, where the Lord God tells Adam that he must not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, knowledge of good and evil, the Hebrew words for good and evil are related to the art of metallurgy. In other words, they are rather more technical terms than moral terms. What is advantageous and disadvantageous rather than what is loving or unloving. So the fall of man is connected in this myth with the development of technology and of man's attempt to acquire power over the world. And so let us suppose then that you really could be God in the old-fashioned sense of Jehovah. We're not going to talk about any sophisticated ideas of Brahma or the Tao or anything like that for the moment, but just good old-fashioned Jehovah. It's like the kid who took too much acid in Los Angeles and turned himself into the police with a little note that said, "Please help me," signed Jehovah. What would you do if you were God in that sense? Everything is known to you. Everything is under your control. You know all futures, all pasts, and all presents. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. What would you do? Well, I think you'd say to yourself, man, get lost. Because you would be incapable of ever having a surprise. And that would be like making love to a plastic woman. So it says, I mean, in the Christian tradition, that God then created man and also the angels with freedom of will, so that they would surprise him. You know, so do your own show. But it never really came off. Because it was said, you see, you've got freedom of will, but you'd better obey me, or else. It's like saying to your child, now you're my child, of course, but you must love me. All nice children love their mothers. And of course, naturally, I want you to love me because you really want to, and not just because I say so. And that is a trick known as the double bind, which is damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because if you do, then you're a goody-goody. And if you don't, you're disobedient. And if you do it the way you're told to do it, then you're just a replica of your parents. And they wanted something different. And that comes the plastic woman again, you see. It's very difficult. So suppose then it was a different thing altogether. That God, and I'm talking in a kind of symbolic language, instead of making an artifact universe, manifested himself or itself or herself as the universe, instead of being always lording it over everything,